Welcome to Teardrop TV, and today we will tell you everything you need to know about the Sonor Phonic series. This video is part 1 of 2, and in this first episode we will focus mainly on the toms and bass drums of the Phonic series, as well as a brief dive into the hardware. And in the next video we will focus on the snare drums, as well as more in-depth information and an interview with Jan Koska, who is probably the guy with the biggest Phonic collection in Germany. The Phonic was Sonor's flagship kit of the 70s, a staple in the 80s, and in the form of the reissue snares still lives on to this day. A quick word about our Sonor videos and the information in them. We made a couple of videos on vintage Sonor series already, so if you're interested in the signature, performer and designer series, as well as shorter videos on the champion series, please check our channel. Also, we are planning to make a couple of videos on other famous snare drums of Sonor and also on the Teardrop series, so subscribe if you're interested in that. We base our research on vintage Sonor catalogs, as well as our own experience and the knowledge of other collectors who are customers, friends and partners of ST drums. If any information is wrong or something important is missing, please comment below the video. So now let's talk about the shells, drum sizes and bearing edges in general, and then let's have a look through the catalogs in chronological order. There were Phonic bass drums, floor toms, tom-toms, snares, and these single head concert toms, which were called rock toms by Sonor. Compared to the champion series of the early 70s, the Phonic had 20 instead of 16 lugs on the bass drums and snares. There are champions with 9-ply shells on all the drums, but they had round bearing edges, or bearing edges as we call them here in Germany. The Phonics had 45-degree bearing edges on all their drums. Having a look at shell sizes in general, you can see that the Phonics usually had pretty large shells. Other than our currently common 22, 10, 12 and 16 setup, the standard configuration back then consisted of a 22 bass drum and 13, 14 and 16-inch toms, which is quite large by today's standard. Also, you can find 18-inch floor toms with a very special feature, namely the 9 lugs per side. This was done to keep the drilling of the 3 brackets symmetrically centered between the lugs. But the problem today is that no manufacturer makes hoops with this configuration anymore. And if they appear on the used market, they are extremely expensive and sold very quickly. As we already mentioned, 22x14 was the standard size of Phonic bass drums, but you can also find 18, 20 and 24-inch bass drums. Smaller tom sizes are pretty rare as well. 14-inch floor toms are usually available in bobsteads, but single 14-inch floor toms of the Phonic series are rare to find. Another relatively rare floor tom size is the 15x17 floor tom from the Phonic Plus series that was introduced in the 80s, but more on that later. Larger tom-tom sizes that are widely available but not as sought after anymore are 14x10 tom-toms, 15x12 tom-toms, as well as Phonic Plus 14x14 and 15x15 tom-toms. By the way, if you're looking for a 14x14 floor tom but only have a 14x14 Phonic Plus rec tom, ST Drums has quite a bit of knowledge in closing the old holes of the tom mount and re-drilling the shell for floor tom legs. You can find the rock tom version of very small toms pretty frequently, and also regular 10-inch toms from the 80s are available sometimes. But if you want 10-inch toms from the 70s or even 6 and 8-inch toms, they are very, very rare. If you want these sizes, you should consider to ask at ST Drums to build you a replica instead. Zwinker smiley. Now for this next segment, we teamed up with Jan Koska, who is the guy to ask about anything Phonic related. He will briefly explain what shell material the Phonics were made of and what exceptions there were. Enjoy!
Hello dear Sonor Phonic enthusiasts, my name is Jan and I'm playing Phonic drums since the mid-80s. One of the most frequently asked questions I receive is, are the Phonic drums always made with 9-ply or from 9-ply beechwood? Even though the badge states they are made from 9-ply beechwood, or the shell consists of 9-ply beechwood shell, I must reveal it's not always the case. They're not always 9-ply and they're not even always made from beechwood. Why is this? First of all, there is like thicker drum shells like the rosewood veneer inside and outside. They are thicker, they're almost as thick as the signature line, so they have more plies, but they're still made from beechwood. And there are drum shells with less plies of beechwood, some of the concert toms, but especially the small size drums do usually have less plies of veneer and are not always made from beechwood. Why is this? We have to go back to the first production line of Sonor Phonic drums. We're talking about the black badge era. The small toms weren't even produced at Sonor, they had to be bought in by a supplier. So all the 6, 8 and 10-inch toms were actually bought in. And the veneer also looks different. I've got an example here. Black badge, and you see how the shell is constructed. Also, the grain of the veneer is horizontal and not vertical. This is another indicator that it's not made at Sonor. And it's made from a different veneer. It's beechwood, but it's not made from cut veneers, as we know. They're actually made from peeled veneers. So what is a peeled veneer? Imagine a pencil and a pencil sharpener. You sharpen your pencil and you peel off a layer of wood. So what is the advantage of this kind of technique? It makes the veneer more flexible and the fibers more flexible. So it's easier to build small shells. So this is why in the black badge area, the veneers and the shells look different. As time goes on, Sonor obviously wanted to produce the small sized shells themselves, but they faced the same problem with the cut veneers. They couldn't produce small sized drums. So at the beginning, they had the chance to purchase peeled veneers as well, but later in production, they had to come up with a different technique. 10-inch toms, by the time they are 9-ply and not bought in anymore and not made with peeled veneers, but 6 and 8 had to be produced in a different way. So they came up with the idea of actually using birchwood. Birchwood is more flexible, less rigid than the cut beech veneer. So if you get a drum, this is a Sonor Phonic Plus drum, and it's got this kind of shell construction. It's much thinner, and you can tell by the wood, it's not beech wood, it's birch wood. So this is all right, this is all original, don't you worry. And a little fun fact, if you wanna build a replica of an early Sonor Phonic, let's say black badge era drum, ST drums know the producer who supplied Sonor with the drum shells in the 70s, the 6, 8 and 10. So if you want a replica, get in contact with ST drums. They can build you 6, 8 and 10-inch toms. Make sure you don't infringe copyrights. Don't put a Sonor Phonic badge on it. You can probably put a neutral Sonor badge on it, but it will always be a replica, or you have to state it's a replica. So that's it for today. Have a good time. Take care. Bye.
Thanks a lot to Jan for this valuable information. The year 1975 marked the 100-year anniversary of the company, which seems like a great time to release a new flagship series. It looks like the Lux didn't have the snap block inserts yet. If you haven't watched our other Sonor videos, especially the one about the signature series, please check that out for more information about the snap block system. The shells had 9 plies of beechwood, and the following wrap finishes were available: metallic copper, blue, orange and silver, high gloss black and white, as well as rosewood veneer and 3 types of acrylic shells: clear, smoky and blue. Because the clear and blue shells were later dropped, they seem to be pretty rare today. If you have a Phonic like that, let us know in the comments below. It is highly likely that even though this catalog was released in 75, the first real Phonic drums were shipped out only in 76. So as you can see, they already prepared the badges and everything, but the real starting point of the Phonics in terms of offering them for sale and shipping them to customers started in 1976. Later, around 77, when a new catalog was introduced, you could get the Phonic shells with the following finishes: natural beechwood, rosewood veneer, smoky acrylic, or one of the following wraps: metallic silver, copper, blue, bronze, pewter, lilac, ruby, and black and white gloss. I would say the silver metallic might be one of the most common wraps you can find on the used market. Lilac is the most flamboyant, and pewter and copper look the most badass. Price-wise, the rosewood ones are the most sought after by collectors, so these also achieved the highest prices on the used market. In the 70s, Phonics had these lugs, and in the 80s they pretty much used the same ones, just with the big stick logo. The bass drum on the Phonic didn't use snap block tension rods, but the toms did. The lugs of all the Phonic models have the same hole-to-hole distance. However, we did realize that some earlier models used slightly larger lugs. Probably the first models that they used were a bit taller and also have thicker walls, and after a while they were able to save some cost by reducing the size. But don't worry, all of the Phonic lugs are high quality, made in Germany. and usually they don't break so easily. Also, the snap block inserts and springs are still available as brand new spare parts. The bass drums had the iconic flat chrome hoops. Actually, the raw material of these hoops were used to create bicycle rims, but the factory that made these hoops turned the metal profile around, so the groove that would normally hold the rubber tire was now on the inside of the hoop and the outside was flat. That's why Sonor had to use these plastic pieces on the inside to fill in the gap to give the pedal something to hold on to. In the late 80s, the bicycle company stopped producing the materials for these hoops and Sonor was forced to change this detail. Now they started adding wood hoops to the Phonic kits, but officially only black, white and red were available. Also, these were mostly only put on Phonic Plus sets, so maybe they stopped making the metal hoops around 87 when the regular Phonics were discontinued anyway. Another pretty unusual fact about the bass drum is the placement of the spurs. Other manufacturers usually place their spurs in the first third of the drum. However, on the Phonics, the spurs were drilled off-center a bit closer to the drummer, around 20 centimeters away from the better side head. We have two theories on why this setup has been chosen. First of all, with the drillings, you have enough space between the lugs to fold the spurs to the drum when you want to carry it. Sometimes this placement leads to problems when you kick the pedal heavily. The whole drum can start to tilt forward a bit. So some people just turn their bass drums around and exchange their heads to have their spurs further to the front to avoid tilting forward. You can just remove the wing screws and this little slotted screw to open up the bracket and exchange the spurs from left to right, as we did on this champion kit. But now we come to the second theory. If you only mount one single tom-tom on the reversed bass drum like this, the spurs would actually be too far in the front. The whole drum would become unstable and would just roll off to the side. So I guess because the toms were pretty heavy back then, Sonor chose this placement of the spurs also to avoid creating a long rotational axis between the spurs and the pedal. With the original placement, no matter if you just add one or two toms, the weight of the toms is positioned mostly on top of the spurs and not off to the side of the rotational axis of the bass drum. The 70s Phonics had these beautiful bowed or flat iron shaped tom and bass drum mounts that were based on the Teardrop design, but now they had removable screws instead of the fixed threads on the fixed threads on the base plate. Instead of the fixed threads on the base plate. Who is writing these complicated scripts? But now they had removable screws instead of the fixed rods on the faceplate. And in the 80s, they used this model on the toms and this large model on the bass drums. The bass drum and floor tom legs used these brackets in the 70s and these in the 80s. All of the bracket screws and bass drum tension rods had these typical Phonic T-heads with the stripes and the Sonor logo. By the way, when I talk about the 70s and 80s, Sonor didn't start using the 80s parts on the 1st of January in 1980, but there was a transitioning period in the late 70s when these new hardware shapes and new logos were slowly introduced. So especially in the late 70s and early 80s, you have a lot of sets that used parts from different eras. But roughly, you can categorize the Phonics in these two periods. Speaking about periods, the 70s Phonics used the so-called centennial badges. There is a version that says 1875 to 1975, which was introduced at the 100-year anniversary of Sonor in 1975 till 1977. And then there was this version that just says 1875, which was probably used starting in 77 or 78. Then there's this third centennial version, which is the golden badges. And it was used exclusively on the Phonics with rosewood veneers, but some later rosewood Phonics are also available with regular centennial badges. Be careful though, in the early 80s there was a time when leftover 70s champion hardware and shells were combined with some of the newer 80s parts to create a kind of in-between era kit. Basically these sets are kind of post-champion and pre-performer, so they are at a price range below the Phonics. These kits sometimes use the leftover gold badges on them, so it's like the famous saying, not everything that glitters is gold. There is a catalog from 1978 which shows a new version of the Phonic badges. The badge is larger and basically shaped like a standing rectangle with a hole a bit below the center. The badge is black with silver writing and a big Sonor stick logo. On the snares, they used a similar lying rectangle with a hole on the left side. We heard from some sources that this badge was not used in a production, but just on prototypes that were shown in these catalogs. But during our research, we managed to find a bass drum with this exact badge on the used market. The seller was kind enough to allow us to use his pictures. You can see that this was clearly a short transitioning period in the very late 70s. The bass drum spurs are the 70s model, but the bass drum mount on top is already the new 80s model. The more common badge that was used throughout the 80s was actually very similar to this one, but with reversed colors. They settled for this silver logo with black writing on it. The 80s toms actually featured two badges. one on each side of the tom mount. Usually one badge said 9-ply beechwood and the other looked more simple. In the 80s they also had these special versions of the badges for the different veneer finishes that they offered, and it said genuine veneer on them. By the way, in this 78 catalog they introduced the following veneer choices: genuine rosewood, natural oak, rustic oak, as well as red and dark mahogany. Mostly, the Rosewood Phonics have veneer on the outside and the inside, but to every Sonor rule there were exceptions. So sometimes Rosewood Phonics can also be found with veneers only on the outside. The 70s Phonics tom-toms had internal mufflers on the better side, and it seems like some toms had a separate muffler on the reso side, but I have only seen this setup on drums with rosewood veneers. There are some Phonic bass drums with an internal muffler, similar to the one from the Signature series, but I think they only used this in a transitioning period between the late 70s and early 80s before the Signature was introduced, because in later 80s catalogs they don't show internal mufflers in the Phonics bass drums anymore. Now the time around the early 80s is a bit hard to reconstruct, but I will try to lay out the information I could find in a kind of orderly fashion. I have found this picture of the finish choices. The finishes are actually the same as the ones in the late 70s catalog that we just saw, but the badges and the tom mounts are already the 80s ones, so probably this picture is from 80 or 81. Also, it's interesting that some of the toms still got internal mufflers, and the smoky acrylic shell was still in there. In the timeline that you can see at sonormuseum.de, it is stated that acrylic Phonics were removed from the lineup in 1981, so this is probably their last appearance in a catalog. Although not mentioned in a major Sonor catalog, we did find this newsletter from Sonor from 1981. It states that new finishes for the Phonics were available, namely new metallic colors, as well as ahorn, which is maple, and also Nussbaum, which is walnut. We never came across these two finishes, and the 82 catalog does not mention them, so it is hard to tell if these finishes were actually ever put on a real Phonic drum. If you got a walnut or a maple Phonic at home, please let us know in the comments below and send us some pictures. In 82, the Phonic Plus series was introduced, which featured longer shells. For example, the regular 22x14 Phonic bass drum was now available as a 22x18 Phonic Plus, and the toms of the Phonic Plus were basically shaped like the Signature series. Rag toms had the same length and diameter, and the floor toms were between 1 and 2 inches longer than the diameter. The earliest Phonic Plus drums were available with a white wrap finish or mahogany wood. One small difference to the regular Phonics is also that the heads of the bass drum tension rods and the screws on the mounts and brackets were these thicker ones that could also be found on the Signature, Light and Highlight series, as well as some Performers. And the Phonic Plus bass drums shared the brackets of the bass drum spurs with the Signature series, except one little detail: the Signature series had their fancy leather nuts, and the Phonic Plus series had nuts that resembled the shape of the bass drum tension rods and the other wing screw heads that we just mentioned. The regular Phonics from the 80s did not have these brackets on their bass drum spurs, but used the same model as their floor toms. The earliest Phonic Plus drums in this 82-83 catalog actually used the wing screws that typically were known from the Performer series. It seems like they switched to the Signature style wing screw later and left this banana shape to the Performer series. So then there was another catalog from the early 80s, but it is not completely clear if it was released in 82 or in 83. In this catalog, the available finishes are rosewood, natural oak, red mahogany, as well as metallic silver and bronze, and also black and white gloss. At sonormuseum.de, it says that the genuine rosewood veneer was discontinued in 1983. So this seems to be the last depiction of a rosewood finish on toms and bass drums. However, in the Japanese catalog from the late 80s, that we will see later as well, rosewood Phonics are still shown. The toms and also the snares still have an internal muffler in this early 80s catalog. In the later 84 catalog, most of the metallic wrap colors were scratched, and you were only able to choose between black and white gloss, metallic red or red mahogany. An honorable mention is the limited Phonic Plus High-Tech series that was made between 85 and 86. They used a special matte grey metallic wrap that is said to be inspired by a car that the Sonor owner drove, as well as black powder-coated hardware. Also, they had their own black badges with white writing on them, similar to the ones that we've seen earlier in the 78 catalog. The regular Phonic series ended in 87, and the Phonic Plus were discontinued in 89. So let's quickly reconsider all the information we gathered so far about dating a Phonic set. In general, lugs with small sticks, boat-shaped mounts, floor tom prism clamps with 2 drilling holes are all 70s hardware. Lugs with big sticks, trapezoid tom mounts, the big bass drum mounts with 4 screws, and floor tom prism clamps with 3 screws are 80s hardware. 75 to 76, this batch, 77 to roughly 79, this batch, and 80 to 89, this batch. And again, finished choices 75, 77, around 81, around 82 or 83, and 84. Another way to date a set is by looking at the stamps inside the shells. These old drums usually have 3 digits. The first number is the last digit of the year. So if the kit has a centennial badge and a number starts with a 6, it has to be from 76. The second 2 digits stand for the month. So 605 was made in May 76. 702 is from February 77. And if you got an 80s badge instead of a centennial badge, then 702 would mean February of 87. These stamps in the shells were added at the end of the production, right before the heads were placed on the drums. Now, before we get into snare drums, let's mention a few hardware quirks that the Phonic series had. All of the hardware is very robust and heavy, and if you can find them for a cheap price, it's always recommended to get them. In the 70s catalog, you can find this special bass drum beater that was made in collaboration with Swiss drummer Daniel Humer, which was made from wood with a felt stripe and had a thread on the side where different metal weights could be screwed in order to adjust the feel of the pedal. The before mentioned special wing screw head was a detail that could be found on all the hardware of the Phonics, like hi-hat clutches, cymbal stands, and even tuning keys. The first double tom holder in the 70s was basically just a plate with 2 prism clamps screwed on there and space for a third clamp on the back, for a cymbal arm for example. Later in the 80s, this new version was introduced that was shared with the Signature, Light, Highlight and Performer series. We also want to mention the bass drum pedals quickly. The 80s model has a quite large plate and has many options to adjust. Also, the head is so-called quick beater with an angle shaft. It was probably created to have the beater hit the drumhead in the very center, because with this machine and the straight shaft, the beater always hits a little off to the side. A quick word on the mufflers. There are versions with a round knob, and later also this wing screw was more common. Some external mufflers had chrome-plated thumb nuts or the wing screw to adjust them.
So, I guess this was everything for episode 1. If there are some questions about the Phonic series that you would like us to cover in the next video as well, please comment below, and also please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, because this will help us to make more videos like this in the future. In the next video on the Phonic series, you will learn everything about the Phonic snares with a particular focus on the rosewood models, and also we will show you how you can recreate your own almost Phonic custom snare. Also, we will present more in-depth information from Jan Palkowska, and he will show us his Phonic collection. So thanks a lot for watching and see you in the next video.